In order. Just a reminder, board members, staff, guests, and members of the public are reminded that the full authority board meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the authority's website along with the official written minutes. As such, comments and opinions expressed may be published, and any comments expressed by individual board members, guests, and the general public are their own and do not represent the opinions or comments of the full authority and or the KCCA board of directors. The recorded video of the full authority meeting is not considered the official record of that meeting. The official record of the full authority meeting shall consist solely of the minutes approved by the full authority. I would note that there's one addendum to the closed session, item D, a legal matter, section 28 violation. And at this time, I ask if there's any declarations of pecuniary interest. Ian? For the closed session on item D, and I have one on under closed session, item C. So first up is we have the minutes of the meetings. Moved by Linda, seconded by Max. Any questions or comments? All in favor? That's carried. The personnel and finances. You want that approved as well?
Yes, please. Just noting the two recommendations that the committee made, and those were, both three, that the purchasing policy and procedures be presented at the October 17th full authority meeting, and that's included further down on the agenda, and that staff be directed to develop a 2019 draft budget incorporating the cost of living increase of 2% and a levy increase of 7%.
Ralph, seconds. Myself?
So you can certainly call me consistent, but I will certainly not be voting in favor of this, and I think that increasing our levy by 7% is inappropriate. And if any of us political officials have been going door to door, you'd certainly hear that from people in the community. I think that we need to revisit this and have a lower amount of levy increase. 7% is unacceptable.
Okay.
I would ask for a recorded vote.
This isn't actually voting on the budget?
No, but this is a direction.
And it's a direction, yes. And if you want to record a vote on that, that's fine.
I think the sign-in sheet. So, Bill Mackey,
Yes.
Max Moore,
Yes.
Ralph Renfield,
Yes.
Ian Chard,
Yes.
Marcel Meyer,
No.
Linda Stevenson,
Yes.
David Marr,
Yes.
and the motion passes.
Thank you. And matters arising. We have the September, October project tracking report.
So, Mr. Chair, as you can see from the project tracking as well as the media report, a number of events happened over the September-October period. You'll note from the slide in front of you, the Carolinian Forest Festival is held, led by Betsy and a committee that held at Springwater Park, with over 2,000 children attending that event. And to Betsy's credit, she had to deal with a lot of weather-related incidences that week, rain and everything, but all of the children had a good time. A number of tree planting events took place over that period as well. 100 large stock trees planted at Kingsville Park. We did a number of educational programs down at Dan Patterson over this period as well. The campgrounds closed on September 30th, and the staff transition now to closing down the campgrounds and getting started on their long maintenance list for the off-season. And certainly welcome any questions on the project tracking, or if I may, the media report.
Any questions on this, Linda?
Just a congratulations on the success of all those kids. I mean, that's a phenomenal.
few thousand. So very impressed with that. And secondly, on behalf of the city at Pinafore Park, really appreciate the tree planting. It was well received as well. We've heard lots of comments, so thank you.
Anything further? Do you want
A motion
Motion.
to accept both of those
Okay,
reports.
so that's the project tracking report and the media report. Bill?
To move that?
Okay, seconded. Marcel? Any further questions? All in favor? That's carried. And then we have the watershed conditions report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Water levels currently fluctuating with storm events. We had some pretty crazy weather with 35 to 37 degrees last week and then 0 degrees the other day. We did issue a water safety for storm surge at the end of September. There were some pretty windy days, but nothing really came of that. I had the opportunity to attend the Ontario Flood Risk Management Workshop in Toronto, which is a great opportunity for all the CAs to get together and talk flood mitigation and response, which is always really good. And just a little bit of positivity for Jeff Colson mentioned that for the winter, we are looking at higher than normal temperatures, but higher than normal precipitation amounts, especially lake effect snow. So, good luck.
That's just great news.
It depends on where the Gulf Stream hits and where this not a super El Nino, but there's an El Nino event that's fast approaching. So it'll depend on where that hits. So.
Mr. Chair, I gotta ask, with her wishing us good luck, is she going south for the winter?
I'm sure she does.
Yeah.
I would
Please
note
contact.
that surge, I'm not sure if it was that exact day or not, but in Port Stanley, you probably heard about a fish tug that came loose and slammed into the lift bridge. There was also a sailboat that did the same thing. The fish tug did better than the sailboat. But there was no major damage, luckily, on that bridge. But it was closed down for a day because we had to do inspections and make sure everything was okay. But it was, when the water comes right up over top of the harbor wall and starts coming up through the drains, you know something's going on. Okay, so we should have a mover and seconder to receive that. Max? No, Bill? All in favor? That's carried. Conservation Ontario update.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to take an opportunity to update members on a couple of things that have come up relative to Conservation Ontario. Did attend the council meeting on September 24th. Key highlights of the meeting, CO continues to work through this transition of conservation authorities to the Ministry of the Environment after serving years under the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. So far, CO cannot provide any real news on how that transition is working, other than there has been a steering committee made up of assistant deputy ministers from both ministries who will be responsible for that transition. Conservation continues to advocate to get some information and provide information to those two ministries as well as they look at this transition. Another item that I wanted to update members on was that on September 27th, Conservation Ontario advised that the Auditor General of Ontario released a special audit of the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority. The CAs were aware that this audit was being undertaken. All 36 CAs were invited to reply to a survey from the auditor based on different elements of our business. But the key audit was on Niagara, and there was a number of recommendations that did come out of the audit. And 6 of those recommendations pertain to all of CAs, not specifically to Niagara. So I just thought I'd highlight some of those today. If you have a chance, I've included the link to the full report. It's an interesting read, and I think something that you'll hear more of over the next couple of months. But the 6 recommendations that pertain to all the CAs, one was there's, that's not coming up at all. Maybe it's my glasses, but I can't hardly see that. So the recommendation number 1 was that the ministry clarified members' accountability to the Conservation Authority. And this is basically pertaining to the fact that while you're representing municipalities, or your municipalities names you as a rep to the board, when you're here at the board, you're looking after the accountability of the watershed and responsibilities of the authority here. For each one of these recommendations, the ministry has provided a response as well. The other recommendation, number 4, was that the ministry was making a recommendation that the Section 40 of the Conservation Authorities Act be proclaimed. And Section 40 looks at making a regulation prescribing requirements for board composition that would result in board members having the independence and objectivity they need to fulfill their oversight responsibilities. And that the ministry work with Conservation Ontario and CAs to determine whether governance training should be developed and delivered province-wide for board members of conservation authorities. And some of the things the ministry said in response to those recommendations is MECP would work with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing to develop governance training for board members of CAs, that the ministry is willing to develop EMPs for recruitment and selection of board members. And if you recall, those types of ideas have come up, you've seen them before throughout the CA Act review, so I don't think any one of those recommendations is necessarily new. But something that we do have to work through in cooperation with the ministry. Recommendation number 8 was one that applied to all CAs, and that was recommending that clear responsibilities and criteria for developing and updating floodplain maps across the province be looked at, and that the ministry review current funding levels to conservation authorities to determine how floodplain mapping can be completed in a timely manner. And so that recommendation to CAs and certainly to COs is something that we've been advocating for a number of years. As you know, our provincial grant money hasn't been increased since the 90s, and CO projects that to update floodplain mapping across the province would be a $136 million project to undertake. I do, just you are a member of municipalities, I do caution you that the ministry's response is a little troubling, I guess, from the municipal perspective. It's basically saying that the responsibility to identify floodplain mapping ultimately rests with the municipality, and recommends the actual wording in the response from the ministry is that while municipalities may choose to rely on the services of conservation authorities to undertake floodplain mapping, the responsibility for identifying these areas ultimately rests with municipalities. So it seems to indicate that the province would be pushing back to the municipalities if they want that to cover that cost of updating that floodplain mapping. So certainly that's generating discussions around the GM level as well as at CO level as to how to advocate that floodplain mapping benefits everyone in the province. Recommendation number 22 in the report looks at clearly describe for conservation authorities what the development of natural resources entails and how it differs from development in general. Generally, recommendation number 22, there's a number of points there, but it looks at clearly defining again the objectives and the programs and services that CAs deliver. And then again, I believe this really goes back to some of the discussion that we had during the CA Act review and the concerns both from public and other interest groups that the CA programs and services do differ across the province, and looking at consistencies and those types of things. So the province's response to that they would establish regulations outlining programs and services the CA is required to provide and develop standard expectations for programs and services provided by CAs on behalf of municipalities. So part of the ministry's response to that is they would agree that we can be clear on what our programs and services are, but they don't want to stray from the fact that the CAs really, their value comes from their ability to work on a local scale and address local concerns. So they don't want to muddy the waters by coming up with a provincial standard that then prevents municipalities and CAs coming up from programs and services that are unique and benefit their area specifically.
Can I just interrupt and ask with specifically that or those two recommendations?
Yeah.
Does that mean that there's a shift in what the province believes that now they're pushing towards municipalities identifying flood areas?
I think what you're seeing in some of the responses to these recommendations is an ongoing discussion as to who's ultimately overseeing or who is the CA really a creature of. Are they a provincial creature or are they a municipal creature? And that isn't a new discussion. I would say that's a discussion that's been ongoing. The province's perspective, I think, is to say that the CAs deliver mandated programs and services on behalf of the province. One of them is flooding. But the choice to have a CA comes from the municipalities gathering together and saying, we choose to have this program locally.
So is the province's directive mostly from a financial basis? Because they don't want to fund the mapping that they're trying to put. I'm just trying to understand the dynamics, because this is something that I don't think any of us have seen before. Or at least I haven't.
Joe's dying to say something.
If I may, Mr. Chair, I think too, when we look at the provincial response in that auditor's report, in those comments, they're referring to the Planning Act. So the responsibility of the municipality under the Planning Act to uphold the provincial policy statement. So when we look at the provincial policy statement, conservation authorities have been delegated responsibilities for Section 3, which is natural hazards, deals with flooding, deals with erosion. However, the municipality has the responsibility to ensure the entire provincial planning policy is adhered to, which includes Section 3.
Right.
So when I read that statement, it sounds like they're referring more to, because of the responsibilities of the Planning Act, they see the municipalities being responsible for flooding. Even though we've been delegated to that specific section, the municipality has responsibility for all sections.
That makes sense. Okay. Thank you. Thanks for the clarity.
Okay.
Just touch on the last two recommendations that pertain to all CAs. Recommendation 23 is that the ministry work with municipalities to develop and implement a formal, cost-effective and purposeful reporting process that includes a discussion of the outcomes of conservation authorities' activities. And this is again something that I think the province identifying that there's no real mechanism in which the CAs are necessarily consistently reporting back to the provinces or their municipalities. It depends really the relationship between each CA and their member municipalities. The province really asks nothing more currently than our audited financial statements and a financial report. So looking at greater detail in terms of how we're reporting back. And recommendation 24 was to determine the circumstances when ministry or municipality intervention is warranted for issues or concerns, and establish mechanisms for the ministry or municipalities to intervene when necessary in conservation authorities' operations. The ministry response to that one is that the province will work with municipalities to develop and implement a formal cost-effective reporting process, and initially to focus on provincial mandated roles. However, the ministry does caution that we should not assume that the concerns that were raised specifically at the NPCA are present at all CAs, so we don't need to, perhaps, that one specifically came up under recommendation 24 in terms of looking at mechanisms for the ministry or the municipalities to intervene in Conservation Authority's operations.
Any comments?
Just clarity, what's NPCA?
Sorry, Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority, they're the original, that is the CA that was looked at in terms of this audit.
Yeah, I just heard about two there, thank you.
Myself, I see a conflict there in the recommendations, and that they say that when we come here representing the municipality, but when we sit here, we're a board member, but at the same time, we're saying their municipalities could potentially intervene on Conservation Authority decisions. That's how I'm reading it. And to me, that's putting board members at a total conflict. Are we or are we not board members, or are we municipal representatives?
I think that comes to relative to the reason why the audit started to begin with. And Niagara was having some local issues at the authority. There was concerns raised by the public. They asked for an audit to be conducted by their regional municipality, which was declined. They went to the province, and they kind of got bounced back and forth until this audit was completed. So it's kind of evident of just having a mechanism to hear those concerns when they're raised, and who ultimately should hear those concerns when they come up. I think that's what that recommendation is.
Now we'll see what happens with their implementation.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think they're making the waters a bit muddier than they needed to in that language. I think it could be challenged a bit. So if some decisions are being made, certainly if the municipality is pushing a certain way, I mean, you are in a conflict, right? You're, just like you're talking about the rates, right? There's a conflict there for most of us who are both, right? I just think they're muddying the waters more, so that's unfortunate. It's unfortunate. I think it could be challenged. And this is exactly how Niagara got into it. But anyway.
Yeah, let's move forward. Anything else? Mover and seconder receive the report. Linda? Ralph? All in favor? That's carried. Next is purchasing policy and procedures.
Mr. Chair, the purchasing policy and procedures was reviewed and presented at the Personnel and Finance Committee on October 4th. We received really no changes from that committee. The recommendation was to present it to you today. In general, I think the new policy looks at best management practices from other CAs as well as local municipalities. It's stronger than our existing policy in that it has definitions, clear policies and procedures in terms of each payment type as well as the expenditure thresholds. I think another key element of this policy is that it provides staff with clear procedure in terms of procedures for RFPs and tender processes, including an evaluation process and a table outlining appropriate actions for irregularities. It was put out in the advanced package, and I welcomed feedback from members, and I have received no comments prior to this meeting on it, so it would be my recommendation that the policy be approved.
Okay, we have a mover and seconder.
I'll move the recommendation.
Ian, second. Discussion. Linda?
Through you too, Elizabeth, just under the limits on the credit card, that kind of thing, you generally bring it back to this board at what amount? It doesn't clearly say that in here. It talks about, your limits, on purchase of what you sign off. When does it come back to full board? At what point do you bring it back?
A little bit of a it depends whether or not the purchase has been approved in the budget. But if you're looking at the threshold,
Mhm.
it's 10,000.
10,000? Okay. It's just that it's not clearly stipulated in here.
So,
In,
Thought that it was in the
in,
limits.
Well, I'm looking at limits, but it doesn't say anything about board when it comes back into the board. So let's say something unusual happens, that's all I'm saying, so something unusual. Tractor blows up. Oh, what did it get in? It got an antler in it.
Yes.
The antler attacked the tractor. You know, and now we've got a big bill of $25,000 or something. Does that automatically come back to us, or do
If
you
it's
approve
not-
it and then it comes through in the budget?
no, if it was something that wasn't included in the budget,
Yes,
it would have to come to the board first.
so it does come to the board
Yeah,
first.
if it's something that's approved in the budget and within a threshold of not having to come to the board, then staff would be able to go and purchase that. In terms of an emergency
Yeah,
that came up, there's a section in the policy that speaks to that specifically and outlines what an emergency is classified
yeah,
for.
and I did read that, and it said, you know, you have to go through the chair and vice chair and that kind of thing. My question was back to board. It was just, you know, when do we sort of hear the grouping of that? So, I would assume it would be in the minutes then of, or no, it would be in the minutes. It would be on the agenda of the next board meeting. Would that be correct? Okay, just so I know, because that's not clearly outlined there, and I'm just bringing that up.
so I think, Linda, you bring up a really good point. And I think it points out the clarity is maybe a little in question. Because my interpretation was, if it's a budgeted item, we won't know about it unless it's over 50,000. The chair or vice chair, along with the CAO and, thank you, would have signing authority to make items between 50,000 and 10,000 happen. And as long as they're budgeted, it'll just show on our statement as an expense. I don't think we'll see it. So that's my only concern, that in some ways, I agree with it, but in other ways, 50,000, so something was purchased for 48,000, we had 3 tenders. We didn't necessarily purchase the lowest tender for specific reasons. In cases like that, I think it should be coming to the board, and yet, under the policy, it won't. And I don't know how to, I like the policy, there's very little criticism I have with it, except for if we get 3 tenders and there's justification for not using the lowest tender, there's nothing to say that you need to come to the board, you can still do it if it's under 50,000.
So I'm agreeing with you. I think it's just an addition. I don't think it's a problem that I'm having with the wording of what's currently here. I just think it needs to be a bit of an addition.
So is it the threshold you're concerned with, or?
No, so it's an addendum that if,
Procedure?
for specific reasons, you don't want to use the lowest tender, and it's between 10 and 50,000, should it go to the board, or should, and I'm not suggesting either, I think that the chair and the vice chair certainly have the responsibilities of the board at hand. I just don't know how to word it, it was just a flag that I noticed.
In generally speaking, there are rules in place for you that you must follow if you're not accepting the lowest tender. So if they didn't meet specifications in the tender document, if it was incomplete or inaccurate in the tender document, then you don't have to accept the lowest tender. And that's just general practice in municipalities, I know. I don't think that just because you haven't, if you followed the rules of when you take the lowest and when you take the next one, I don't think that would need to come to the board if you follow the rules and it's within budget. You would still get a report.
Would we? Doesn't say.
Yeah, it doesn't say that.
We've
So
always gotten
what
reports
about
on
just a
any large
notification?
purchases.
What if it could just be as simple as the board is notified? I mean, make it real simple.
So under direct
Right.
Sorry.
Right.
I can make that, I believe I can make the suggestion that if you want under the direct negotiation, and that reads currently that any direct negotiation between 10 and 50 shall be approved by the general manager or designate, provided that the item can be accommodated with the improved budget. So I'm reading that the case where there hasn't been a successful bid process and there's only one person and we're negotiating with that, I can say that those would come to the board
Sounds good.
if that's,
Is that what you're looking for?
I think that helps.
so under
Other
6.
members, do you have any issues with that?
I like the inclusion of the board, that's all I'm saying, under accountability, that's all. Don't think it's going to really change a whole lot for us, it's just a notification.
Under 6.2, I would add notification of the board.
Thank you.
Is there anything else under the purchasing policy? Myself?
To you, Mr. Chair. 5.3, back to Linda's point. When we're purchasing items between 10, let me ask a different one first. Let me ask the question, then maybe my direction you change. How many purchases would we have between 10 and 50,000? Would it be dozens or
No,
hundreds?
oh, no.
Okay, good.
We're talking,
So if it's less than 10, could we in 5.3 include at least that purchase be put on the next agenda? So at least the board will know about the purchases made? Rather than it just become part of the financial statement? Or is there a way to at least, or would that be too difficult?
no, not to, are you asking for board approval or
No,
board notification?
Notification.
Okay.
So it's, because I agree with this policy of 10 to 50,000, as long as the chair is aware of it as well. There needs to be a threshold that staff are dealing with the day-to-day issues. But it would be nice to know that the board is informed of these, and if there's issues arise, we can talk about it after the fact for future reference.
You're talking about something that's already approved in the budget.
Well, just so we know that it's happening.
I know, I'm just clarifying at what point, what is it that you want reported? So you want basically capital purchases or even day-to-day purchases where there is an emergency, even though it's within the budget, you want a report to say,
Not a report, just
well, that's what
yeah,
it
okay, I
is.
guess it is a report.
It's a report, a notification report, it's just,
That
That's
seems,
semantics
that
of
seems
words.
cumbersome, but just so that the board is kept abreast as to how the budget is going, if... So as an example, we budgeted for a new truck, we budgeted for a new lawnmower. I think it appropriate that the board become aware that we purchased the new trucks. Does that not seem appropriate? And I'm asking.
Bill?
Could that not just be itemized in the monthly statement somehow, we know the balance, or as opposed to having a separate report?
They can itemize it in the project tracking.
Well, for that, we
Yeah.
Perfect.
That would work.
Because that way, we're just kept abreast, and it's not really for discussion, it's just, this is what we've done.
that sounds healthy.
That's more of a direction than a policy.
Okay?
I like that, it's not getting us down in the weeds of operations, so I like that, I like that. It's just a reporting mechanism.
So
That's
the
good.
reporting project tracking is just staff direction. The actual change would be the direct negotiation would have to come to the board for anything between 10 and 5. 10.
Anything else? So now we have a mover and seconder on the motion that's amended. Okay? All in favor?
Mr. Chair, if I could just say that I thought a lot of work was done on this, and I just want to commend staff. It was, I'm sure, a lot of work, and it's a good policy.
There was a lot. Okay, next we have statement of revenues and expenses.
A slide for that, but it's in your advanced package under page 54, I believe. I think you'll see from the statements of campgrounds, they've had an excellent season. Both campgrounds, like Whitaker, 18% over target, and Dale at 18% over target. And we know that we still have some revenue coming in. So an excellent year there, and otherwise there's no anomalies to report in the budget.
Any questions? No?
Just kind of aside from that, are we getting to the point where we're ever gonna turn people away, like saturated, or are we getting close to capacity in our campgrounds, or maybe just on long weekends, or even other times?
I'll let Joe answer.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Certainly with our seasonal reservations, we reach the capacity numbers that we seek, so we have had to stop accepting them. And I think this year, we may have maybe a dozen seasonal sites from people leaving at the end of the year that will open up for next year. And basically from transients, I think over the years, we've certainly seen long weekends reach capacity, and I think from the word we're getting back from the coordinators is we're starting to see that more regularly on normal weekends now as well. So when we say at capacity, we certainly sometimes have non-service sites open still, and we still have a handful of sites that the coordinators close for any situations that might happen over the weekend, so we can move people or relocate them to other sites. So, but for the majority of the summer, we're seeing the campsite at capacity.
So there's no plan for expansion for foreseeable future?
I think part of it too, we have the conservation lands budget strategy, where that's kind of some of the focus of moving forward. We do know that we do have some electrical constraints in terms of expansion, so I think when we speak to that, we can kind of highlight some of those things that we're looking forward to the future.
Any other questions, Linda?
I had two on that. The volunteering fundraising line, how are we coming? It doesn't look like we're very far along there. It only says 6%.
So, Mr. Chair, the volunteerism and fundraising, that department really is a flow-through department for most of the monies that's coming over from reserves, either from our capital reserve or from our operating reserve. So it's really not, we didn't target ourselves to go out and fundraise $358,000. It's more of a flow-through department.
Okay. So
it's not like we're not hitting a target, it's just you'll see that number change closer to the end of the year.
right, it's a big number.
It is.
It is a big number. My second question, and I know that the next item is going to be on the dam maintenance, we're at 91%. Are we still tracking okay for money for that particular project, because it's not quite completed, I understand?
Are you referring to the inspection or for?
I don't know, it just says dam maintenance, so you'll have to forgive me, I don't
So
know the
the dam
details.
maintenance refers to an entire department for the dam infrastructure, so both Dalewood and Union Dam.
Mhm.
The majority of that would be wages, so that's the actual inspection has been completed, and that expense is included in there. So there's no other additional expenses other than, I believe, $4,000 relative to having the engineer on site when the embankment work occurs.
Okay, so we're on track, that's
Yes.
what I needed to hear. Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Not gonna have a mover and seconder on the statement. Linda? Max? All in favor? That's carried. So, we're going into our new business, I guess.
Yes, Mr. Chair, so we're going into the work planning and the, for budget 2019, and up this month we have the public safety, the flood monitoring and warning that John's looking after. Together with that presentation, we have representatives from WATAC Services to provide you an update on the inspection that occurred this summer on Dalewood Dam. So I'll turn it over to Jim.
you, Mr. Chair. So, Dalewood Dam this spring, there's muddy water. So just a quick overview of the flood forecasting and warning and with the dam maintenance program. We operate year-round to ensure residents are aware of potential flood-related events. We gather and provide data and support municipalities during flood events. And we also operate and maintain the authority flood control structures, Union Dam, Dalewood Dam, and Southwood Wall. For special projects and enhancements completed in the last couple of years, for flood warning and forecasting, we introduced the weather event fact sheet, which is a new communication tool that summarizes flood events. Gotten some really good positive feedback on these documents, and so I'm pretty happy with it. For dam maintenance, we're working closely with the City of St. Thomas for the Dalewood Bridge Replacement Offsetting Plan. This includes repairs to the upstream embankment of Dalewood Dam, as well as a couple of other nice features, a canoe access area, wetland creation, and shoreline stabilization work. As this is part of an offsetting plan, there's no cost to the authority for these projects. Those are, some aspects will be completed this fall. So we're looking forward to that, specifically the repair work to the upstream embankment. We were also lucky to get a comprehensive full inspection of the Dalewood Dam this June, completed by Wattec Services. The dam is generally in very good condition, with some areas deterioration noted, and the gentleman from Wattec will be going over that a little bit later. Some enhancements that we're looking to implement or continue in 2019. Improving the flood forecasting program through the installation of internet cameras at key locations throughout the watershed for remote field observations during high water events. This is something that I'm really excited about. Just being able to see things at nighttime or at off time, and just be able to have a vision of what's going on in different places in the watershed would be really great. Also developing and preparing for flooding guide or brochure for watershed residents, just so that they have kind of a document that they can refer to, like where do they go for information, what websites to use, who can they contact, that sort of thing, as well as some mapping available. And also continuing to work with member municipalities, emergency management teams for training during flood events. We had some really good successful meetings last year, and hopefully we can continue that good work. For dam maintenance, there's some projects proposed from the timeline based on the 2018 dam inspection report. There are some planned capital expenses for 2019 and beyond as derived from that inspection report. I will be seeking funding from the WECI program, which is a Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry capital cost share program that provides match funding up to 50% to hopefully offset some of those potential costs moving forward. This chart is in your package, but a couple of things, for example, for 2019, small projects, looking at the gradings, hatch covers, some monitoring work on some of the bays, and training wall repair. These are things that Wattec will probably talk about. For flood forecasting and warning, 2020 and beyond, looking at researching ways to improve and modernize and maintain KCCA's flood forecasting and monitoring program. There's so much amazing technology out there and things that we can do, looking at improved flood mapping, near real-time precipitation analysis and water precipitation monitoring network. This is a widely used data set. It can be used for tree planting, soil, looking at soil, looking at erosion, all different things. This is a really good data set to continue collecting data on. Working with KCCA's IT department to create a centralized database where all of this data can be stored and used and queried. and access for watershed residents to the stream gauge system to see real-time water levels, flow, precipitation data throughout the web, through the KCCA website, which will be an interesting thing for watershed residents to be able to access.
Can I just ask a question on that?
Sure.
Becca, just curious, we have a number of new housing developments going up. And certainly, we talked extensively around the Duck Terry, around the Miller Pond area. And there was a body of water there that was considered sensitive, that kind of thing. But we're also hearing a lot of complaints around flooding in those subdivisions, in and around the newer area. How much involvement do we get in some of the planning process as a conservation that says, water should be, we should be allowing more area here for flooding events, those kinds of things. It's sort of a constant voice that seems to be coming forward as the streets go up. The water's got very little places to go. We then hear about backyards being flooded. So how much help can we be, or are we, to the planning department on those things?
I think from what I understand we're speaking to is dealing with more urban flooding with surface runoff of the rear yards, or the infrastructure isn't designed to a storm event to handle the storms we're dealing with now. That really falls more under the municipal jurisdiction through the engineering and the storm ponds. So when we review those plans of subdivisions, our primary review is looking at the water leaving those lands to the water courses and ensuring there's no increased downstream flooding. So in those plans of subdivisions, MOE has a specific guideline for those stormwater management ponds to ensure all of that runoff in the plan of subdivisions gets directed to a pond, settles, and they control to ensure that the water leaving those lands meet pre-existing rather than increased flows to the creeks. So when it comes to the design of the storm sewers, the rear yard grading to direct it to the road sewers, that's really more of the responsibility of the municipality and the municipal engineers through the developers. So we don't necessarily play a significant role in that, but we do play a role in reviewing the design of the storm pond and the water leaving the development lands.
Okay, so that clarifies part of it for me. So that pond that
Yes.
is over there, let's say that we have a storm event and that floods out, causing quite a bit of damage around that neighborhood. I wouldn't want people in there tampering with that particular body of water, right?
Right.
So I'm just wondering what our role is in those sensitive areas. I just have a feeling it's kind of like the Lake Margaret thing. It's people start wanting to do their own thing, and it starts causing us all kinds of friction. And it seems like that one's gone on forever, but I see a similar thing happening across the road with that water pond over there as well. But
And on that comment, I mean, the province sets a guideline for the type of year storm those ponds have to be designed to. Now, from our regulatory perspective, we deal with Hurricane Hazel, but certainly municipal infrastructure and ponds are not designed for that standard because they would be astronomical. And I think typically we would see a lot of urban flooding in that case. But, I think we do review, we comment, but with regard to the specific concern, we kind of rely on municipal engineers to deal with that drainage aspect. It's more of a drainage aspect than necessarily a riverine or lake flooding issue.
I just see them, topping up, and then you got 10 yards that are just going to be all underwater. But I'm just asking because it was considered environmentally sensitive, those kinds of things, right? So anyway, okay, thank you. That's a bit of an education just for me. Sorry.
Sorry, that's the end of the.
That is the report.
Did anyone have any questions?
Marcel, do you have?
If I read one of the reports, there's a $20,000 estimate for the log lifter to be converted to manual for, but I don't see the 20,000. Oh, sorry, right here. I did not see that, thank you.
Anything else?
It's a good report.
So I've just.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, maybe if you can hear the report from WATAC, and then take it on.
That'd be fine.
board members. From Watech, I have Greg Pritchard and Jacob, who worked on the Dalewood Dam inspection in June. They did all of the in-water and above-water work and prepared the report that you have in your packages, and they are going to go through a few things for you. And if you have any questions, please direct them to them. They are the experts in this particular report. So, thank you. Or is it all matters?
Hello everyone, my name is Greg Pritchard, this is Jacob McDonald. Jacob's an engineer in our company, I'm the president of the company. And we did an inspection for you of the Dalewood Dam in June this year. Largely the reason for that inspection was due to a major flooding event that we had in the spring. I think most of you will probably remember that. Port Stanley was flooded out among other places, and it was quite a thing, and the Conservation Authority was concerned for the integrity of the dam. The dam is getting, it's getting older. We did find on the positive side of things that the dam sustained that flooding event well, or we did identify some concerns in there. This photograph here is basically of the upstream side of the dam. That's right in the middle of summer and things are looking fine there. So can we show a downstream picture there? Or we'll just go through the report then as it is there. So basically we assessed the condition of the concrete. That was the major component of the inspection. It is a concrete structure and an earth-filled bank structure. One of the things we were looking for is deterioration of the concrete, deterioration of the stop logs, and possible seeps of water coming through the earth portion of it. We did find in the inspection that there was a potential seep location. However, I believe it's largely related to, on the upstream side of the dam, there's an embankment on the south side of the watershed that is quite eroded. That is currently being repaired under the bridge contract, and that should prevent prevent some of the possible water that's coming through the dam. We noticed actually we went back a couple of times. First time we went there was actual ponded water and the downstream spillway, past the spillway. Second time we went, the area was just wet, but it was during a very dry period, so we do know there is a potential for some water seeping through there. So that's a condition that should be monitored during future inspections. And in addition to the concrete, I'll just kind of go through the report there, get to where we get to the dam deck. Yeah, okay. The concrete deck of the structure is actually in very good condition. There has been work done on that over the years, and there are no real issues to deal with on that. Both of the abutments, the concrete in the abutments is in good condition. The piers themselves are in relatively good condition. The log gains, where you insert the logs to control the water level, they're in relatively good condition. The logs themselves are starting to deteriorate. There is some leakage through the logs, between the logs. There's some evidence of rotting of the logs themselves, and they will have to be replaced within the next 2 or 3 years is the timing for that. One of the most significant things we noticed was bays 2 and 3, right in the middle of the structure, in the middle of the bay, there are 2 significant cracks there. Now, these are vertical cracks in the middle of the bay, which suggest at some point something has happened to stress the dam. The cracks appear very old. They're weathered. There's some erosion of the cracks, and there's no displacement, meaning that both sides of the crack, the concrete is even. So what we have to do in the future is examine and make sure that there's no displacement or movement of those cracks. That indicates that the structure is moving. I believe that those cracks have been there for quite some time now, and I don't think there's an issue there, but it's prudent for us to examine that, in a year's time, and just see if there's any different condition there. You can't see these cracks, they're completely under the water, and they're very difficult even for divers to see because, you know, there's zero visibility in there. The condition of the water itself is such that you'll never really ever see in there. Possibly in the middle of winter, after a very still condition, you may be able to see at that point. But our recommendation was just to have a look at those cracks again next year and do an assessment just to see if there's anything different. If we don't know there's anything different, then we can make that assumption that those cracks have been there for some time and are not a real concern. One of the things that was mentioned was the log lifter itself. The log lifter that's out there, it still functions. It's exercised somewhat by the Conservation Authority just to see that it still works, but it is a very awkward and cumbersome system to use. And for the times that they use that structure there, you know, it could be modified and made into a much simpler, easier to move and more operational system. They do not use that structure much, and to be honest with you, there's not a whole great deal of flood capacity or flood retention behind that dam, due largely because there's not much room to pull logs. I think there's, what, 2 logs in there now, Jennifer? And they would possibly like the ability to pull a log in the spring, maybe pull both of the logs out and be able to easily put them back again. So I think that's why they're going to be seeking funding to, you know, make that log lifter a little more usable, user-friendly, and they could gain some flood control that way. You know, not a lot. There's not a huge area. The lake behind there is not that significant. But, you could gain something there to be able to have that ability to pull logs and have a little bit of storage behind the dam itself. So the watershed, it's actually very shallow upstream of that dam. Most of the area in front of the dam is actually filled in with sediment. There's probably 5 to 10 feet of sediment for the most part right in front of that dam, and the actual water level itself is very minimal in there. So, the other area that you know, there will be some maintenance work required. There are gratings that are above the stop logs to prevent anyone from falling through and that sort of thing. Those gratings should be maintained, you know, some painting and possible replacement in the future. But generally, for the most part right now, I think they're good for another couple or 3 years we have in there. We also have what's called a low flow valve on that dam. There were several low flow valves at one time, but due to the sediment buildup behind the dam, all of the lower valves are now basically covered over with sediment. So we actually blocked those a few years back so that in the event that sediment were to wash out of there, that you wouldn't get all of a sudden a rush through. So there is only one operational low flow valve. What that does is if the water level should drop below the stop logs, it gives you the ability to pass some water through to the lower part of the river, just to maintain some flow for fish habitat and that sort of thing. So in general, I don't think you use the valve that much, did you, Jennifer?
It is, as part of our maintenance routine, it's worked twice.
Yes, and that was recommended in our report, that valve regularly be exercises, because basically it's a sluice gate and they do seize up if you don't open them and close them. And I believe the authority does that twice a year now, just to make sure that the valve is operational. But largely, I think this year what we found is that we've had significant dry periods, but there's most of our rain has been coming a lot all at once. And for the most part,
With the other set not working though, with the north, is it the north side? With the other side not being visible or not working, what's that say to us about the dam itself? Like if we needed to use them, is that, would there be any reason to use them?
no, you wouldn't really need to use them. If you've got one operational, that seems to give enough flow to actually, and it's actually 5 or 6 feet under the water, and it's right at the sediment level, so all of the other valves are actually under the sediment level.
So no need to worry that we can't access them?
No.
Okay.
So you have the ability that if you had to, you could pull another log or something from there, but the low flow valve, I think Jennifer would tell you that that keeps an adequate flow to the downstream part of the watersheds.
Okay.
Marcelo, do you have a question?
To you, Mr. Chair, yeah, to the log lifter.
Yeah.
Or discussion. So the dam has the capacity to have 2 logs removed, you can't add beyond 2?
Yes, you could, yes.
So,
Yeah.
what is the average CFM, cubic meters that go over the bridge versus the capacity of the reservoir? As in how many, what kind of capacity do we have of reserve, and could we, for
It's
the,
very minimal. I'm not sure what the effect of the flooding would be if you were to put, say, 2 more logs in.
would that cause peril upstream?
Yes.
And so really we're limited there.
So
As
you-
far as,
They're thinking that they would like to be able to have the ability to put 1 more log in, but have the ability to pull, get it right down to the sill elevation, which is basically 2 more logs.
so to the point of our concern to start with, if we add extra logs, it'll certainly add extra pressure to the dam.
Yes.
Will the dam accommodate that?
Yes, yeah, we're only talking about a foot basically, so.
Bill?
Mr. Chair, you mentioned that the working low-flow valve is at the sediment line.
The low flow valve, yes.
So for that one to remain operable in good condition, should
Yeah.
there be some thought about dredging near that to keep that?
Eventually, you may have to do that, eventually, because the sediment level is very slowly increasing. It's more or less reaching equilibrium now where I think it's not depositing very fast in there. And to some extent, opening the low flow valve on a regular basis will create a channel there for that water to pass through. You obviously have to be careful you're not releasing too much silt through there, but it's important to keep the passage of water through there. One of the other things I should mention is that we have the new bridge going in upstream that has a new pier right in the middle of the water body. So we're going to have a change in the way the debris is caught there. I think you're going to find there's a lot of debris caught on that bridge now that used to be caught on the dam. But, that's a regular issue for the dam maintenance people, the authority people, to keep that thing clear of logs, because there's a lot of logs that get caught up on the dam, particularly in these big flood events and whatnot. I know when we did our inspection, we spent a couple of hours, at least the first day, just clearing these logs out of the way so that we could actually get to the dam itself, so.
So dredging is something that you would recommend?
I don't see that in the near future. It could be an issue, years from now, but it's unlikely. I think that, most of the time during a storm event, you get enough action there that you're removing some of that silt from the middle of the basin. And it has silted in significantly over the years. It's at least 5 to 10 feet of material has gone in there, so.
Mr. Chair, just on the point of the silting in of the reservoir, Cliff's going to be doing regular monitoring of the sediment levels in the basin of the reservoir, so we have better information moving forward of how the reservoir is changing year to year, so we can add that information to monitoring the sediment levels right in front
And after the bridge is built, it's important to keep an eye on that, because you have changed things upstream for the better or for the worse. It's hard to say, but there will be an effect of that bridge. The bridge itself is going to become more of a dam, I believe, than it was before. And, there could be changes to flow patterns there. I think the work that they're doing on like I said, the south side upstream embankment is very important for the dam's integrity as much as it is for the road, so.
Is that included in this report? Because I don't remember reading about monitoring, so after the new bridge is in, I'm sorry, I may have missed it, but is it in this report that?
Yeah, I think that's just part of just doing a routine inspection to make sure that that is looked at. And
Joe?
If I may, Mr. Chair, through you, that was also discussions and arrangements through the replacement of the Dalewood Bridge, where the city of St. Thomas, in consultation with us, will be monitoring anything up to 2 years after the bridge replacement to ensure the changes and assist with dredging if necessary to ensure that low flow valve isn't buried under sediment.
I guess one of the other things we did discuss was, what are the ramifications of taking that dam out of there? obviously it retains a lot of silt. And then, you know, you've got your campground right next to there. Property values are affected by having that waterfront and all that sort of thing. So not only is it a huge undertaking to take that dam out of there, but and it could be argued that it's not a huge flood protection thing, but it obviously has value to the Conservation Authority and the local community as well. So. Any other questions at all? Or? If you could just put that one sheet up there that has this maintenance schedule here. And I think Jennifer has identified all of these issues here. There is a training wall on the downstream side of the dam that, I guess for lack of a better term, it's a marginal structure that seems to be holding together well, but it's worthy of monitoring as well. It's on the downstream side, on the north side.
Oh, yeah.
Can you explain what the purpose of that training wall is?
It's basically a retaining wall for the earth part of the embankment downstream. So were it to fail, then we're gonna have some loss of soil heading downstream and some instability on the downstream side of that embankment. So it's important to keep it in good condition. And it is a bit of a maintenance issue because it's not an actual concrete wall. It's actually just made of stones. And it's a masonry wall, if you would. And you know, as long as it's maintained, it will be fine. But it is a bit of a maintenance thing that it has to be inspected. And I think we identified and put some money towards that. Yeah, I put $8,500 in there that just regularly maintain, inspect it. And as the mortar is coming away and things like that, if you notice that sort of thing, then it should be repaired because a failure of that will be an expensive issue to correct. So. And the other thing is keep trees away from the structure. That was important there. For the most part, I think that's being done quite well. The embankment, I believe, that they're repairing as part of that bridge construction will be removing quite a few trees in there. It's important to kind of certainly keep them away from the concrete structure and keep the trees away from that downstream retaining wall, the training wall. Anything else?
Anything else? Any other questions? It's quite an elaborate report for sure. Lots of pictures.
So, yeah, so,
I was going through that last night again.
okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So on the two reports we just had, from Jennifer and from Waptak, I have a mover and second to receive. Ralph? Max? All in favor? That's carried. Next we have conservation lands.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So looking at the Conservation Lands Department, this is primarily dealing with both campgrounds, Dale and Whitaker, our significant area, Davies properties, as well as the Cow Creek Dog Park. So, you know, looking at the last 4 years in these lands, there's certainly a lot of accomplishments that we can speak to. I just thought I'd kind of walk through and highlight a few of those things that have been accomplished over those last 4-year term. We've certainly done some significant improvements to our pool facilities in both campgrounds, which are a significant asset to our campers. So this one with Dalewood, we did a full refurbishment with all new concrete decking, pool lining, new pool house and mechanical. This year we just completed a new mechanical upgrade to the Lake Whitaker pool. And in the 2019 budget, we still have a new plaster lining to put in the concrete pool to extend its life expectancy. And we've also introduced accessible pool lifts at both of our pools this summer. Sorry, that was last summer. We also had a significant refurbishment to one of the washrooms with the Lakeshore washroom that was completed this year, where we've seen lots of positive comments and feedback from the improvements that were made there. To our hiking trails and connections, we've added new trails and new connections, specifically looking at the Dalewood North Trail that was closed several years ago to several hazards. We've had the benefit of reopening a portion of that trail and renaming it as the Old Growth Trail in Dan Patterson. And currently this year, we're looking at reopening the Dalewood North parking lot and new trailhead further up Dalewood. So this work is happening right now. So this picture is just showing some of the vegetation removal that staff have been working on to clear the driveway into the back where you can see an old privy and a parking lot that's there. So we'll have contractors out there in the next few weeks reestablishing that road and parking lot, and the trail builders are in there now creating a new trailhead connection to an old lookout tower that overlooks Cow Creek and taking us down to the Dalewood Reservoir Trail.
Do we know approximately how much it would cost us to finish opening the rest of that trail up?
With the Dalewood North, there's the section that runs south. The biggest issue right now is ownership. There was a section of trail that crossed private land through an access agreement in which the landowner had asked us not to proceed with that. So it's an interest for long-term of staff, but there's still some negotiations with private landowners that would have to be achieved first.
Thank you.
So moving ahead, we also have the ability of introducing watercraft rentals again at the reservoir. It's been several years since we've had canoe rentals and things at the reservoir, and we've got that established this year and seen good results and feedback. We also introduced hydro meters at Dalewood, so we were seeing escalating uncontrollable hydro costs that were being seen at Dalewood versus our other campground. By introducing the meters, this is just an example of one of the graphs now that we can monitor daily consumption. This graph is just showing for the month of July. We can break that down hourly and monthly as well. Some things we've realized with this year with the meters is our seasonal campers consumed 66% of the total electrical consumption in 2018, which was similar to our pilot project stats. The other interesting thing is we've seen a decline of 35% in hydro expense since putting them in. So we have seen those numbers come down. That's also recognizing that we've had increased seasonal. So we've actually added 10 more seasonals to those numbers, and we're seeing a significant decline in that expense. There was a few trials and tribulations throughout the summer in terms of getting the reading of the meters and getting the reports out. So we still want to play with some additional statistics next year before we can really report on the success of this, but we're certainly seeing benefit to putting those in. Just for consideration of 2018 hydro consumption, what we've seen is the lowest hydro used by a seasonal camper was as low as $25. Based on Rob's observations, that was a seasonal camper that tends not to use electricity. They rely heavily on the propane in the trailer, and they're in the park mostly on weekends, to the point where we've also seen the highest energy consumption at $745 for 5 months. And that's certainly someone who tends to reside more at the campground and rely on the amenities that come with it. So it helps justify the reasons why it was necessary to put the meter in and create a balance between the energy costs there and control them, as well as what has it done, it also provided an opportunity for the seasonal camper to control their seasonal camping fees by how much hydro they use. So certainly we've seen some success. We still have some things to work through in the next year, but certainly moving forward. The other thing is we introduced the lead hand position into the campgrounds. That was assisting the coordinators and helping out as a competent person with more responsibility in the campground while coordinators aren't there. So we've been seeing significant increase in visitors and users, and also with the implications of Bill 148, we needed this position to kind of offset some of those callback overtime hours that the seasonal staff were having, or sorry, the coordinators. And I think the biggest compliment from the coordinators through this process is they can finally take 2 days off and relax and not always have to worry about the campgrounds on their days off, realizing that that position is available to deal with some of those minor issues. So it certainly has been an asset in the whole structure of our campground staff. And the other thing I kind of looked at just recently is we realized we're getting busier and we're seeing increased users as we go throughout the years. If we look at the total revenue accounts for the campgrounds over the last 4 years, we've actually increased our total revenue by 42%. So a combined of $240,000. With that, certainly we also see increased expenses, which come with it, but it's certainly a success of the campgrounds and how they're growing and moving forward to consistently putting back revenue into our reserves every year. So certainly a lot of successes over the last 4 years. As we...
Just on capacity issues, so we were talking about how busy it was and how many more sites would you recommend or not to build a little more capacity?
Right, so moving forward, if I may, when we look at the 2019 projects, I'll skip ahead to a couple. What we're really thinking we're at now, aside from finishing up some cool work this year at Lake Whitaker and a playground at Dan Patterson, all of our capital assets in our buildings and facilities we believe are in a good state where we can start focusing more on interior renovations and improvements to some of the equipment inside those buildings so we can avoid the refurbishment. What that's resulting in, if I could answer Lynn's question, what that results is now our focus can go back to looking at upgrades and revenue generating projects in our parks. We do know, like at Lake Whitaker, we do have some electrical constraints at the road, so if we needed to expand and receive more electricity, we would have to upgrade the electricity all the way down Dome Road to Avon to bring that electricity in. So one thing we're looking at is we certainly have lots of 15 amp sites. We have sites that could use some drainage improvements. We have a lot of unserviced sites where we think if we can get those sites upgraded and improved over the next few years, we'll see more attraction or drawn to those sites. But I think as we move forward, some things we have to do is start getting some professional opinion to help us in guiding what that future expansion areas are. So for instance, we want to get an electrical audit on a few of the transformers in the park where we're looking at future upgrades or future expansions, so we really know what our constraints and opportunities are. And then we can take that information and start building a master plan for the parks that we can look at a 5-year term to see really how can we expand and increase those revenue generated ideas. As well, we want to get a site drainage conditions report done for Lake Whitaker, just due to the nature of the current drainage and the landscape of the land. When we have inclement weather, we do see lots of areas of the park where we're having to close sites, relocate campers to other sites, and because we are so busy, it's getting more and more difficult to make those accommodations. So we want to get a drainage engineer to provide us some advice on how to correct those drainage improvements. And then really the focus is going forward with we'll see over the next few years replacement of vehicle and equipment. We still have a couple older vehicles that need to be replaced in terms of fitting into our corporate identity and due to their year and age. But there'll be a subsequent capital asset report coming next month that'll highlight that a little more. We also, like I said, want to look again at investing in our existing facilities with bringing them up to a standard that's going to extend their life expectancy.
So I certainly like the idea of a master plan, but make sure that we have enough time in our conversation because we're going to have to look at a lot of different components as you're stating.
Correct.
But I also would like to know when we think it's appropriate to stop building campsites as well, right?
Right.
This is a conservation area and we don't want to get overcrowded, but provincial parks are really, they're stretched to the max.
Right.
So we know it's coming. We know
Right.
it's coming. Last time I looked, provincial parks in Melville booked almost 2 years in advance. They're getting crazy. So we can see that flow is going to shift, but we need to have a discussion. I think there needs to be a fairly lengthy discussion as to what that looks like. What is our capacity? What's it going to take to get there? We don't want to deny access, but by the same token, we are the stewards, right?
And I totally agree, and I think by getting some of these answers, it'll identify those opportunities and constraints that can inform us on those future expansions. So also some things in 2019 we're looking at is some policies and procedures. So we have announced today the legalization of cannabis, and we need to see how that implicates into how we're going to apply
Are we growing?
private land rules for our campers. So with that, Mike and Tim are going to be going to a conservation areas workshop at the end of the month, and I'm sure it'll be a hot topic of discussion at that event, so we intend to come back with some policy considerations to deal with that. We also want to continue efforts of paperless applications and efficiencies, and we'll speak to that on another agenda item today where we're seeing big improvements. And then back to our significant areas, started looking at exploring other event bookings at Dan Patterson and possible expenditure reductions at Kettle Creek Dog Park. We've had interest in advertising in the park or other events. So again, I think the focus moving forward into our next few years is really looking at revenue generating projects now that we've got our facilities to a point where we don't anticipate any significant renovations or refurbishments. So, and then the only other thing I know from 2020 and beyond moving on is really again identifying those staff pressures because of the increased usage to our campgrounds or significant areas, as well as the user group pressures on our trails. So we know there's interest for mountain biking and the need to look at that, working with our municipalities, as well as the ongoing issues with hazard trees and encroachments around our lands that abut private properties. So I think we've had a good last 4 years, and moving forward, we can get back to focusing on increasing that revenue generation in our campgrounds. And just the last slide is just to compliment and congratulate our conservation lands teams and the efforts that they make. These are the staff that are out there every day ensuring that our properties are safe and
Nice
and
bug
aesthetically
shots.
pleasing, so.
We'll leave the mug shots alone.
Yeah.
Any questions on that report? If not, we can have a mover and seconder to receive. Linda and Ralph, all in favor? That's carried. And where are we at? Are there any conservation area expenditures?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, resulting, again, our campgrounds are seeing the revenues again this year, and the ability to put, I think we're estimating 33,000 to put into revenue departments. But there's a couple of year-end expenditures we would like to seek board approval on. These are expenditures that weren't necessarily considered in the budget, but because of the year-end revenue status, we're seeking approval to proceed with. A lot of these items resulted from our health and safety inspections, primarily focusing on the workshops in our campground areas. I think over the years, they tend to be an area where things are getting stored and placed, and we're running out of land, so they're just randomly finding places to store things. And I think there's a lot of storage of materials that have been there prior to any of the current staff that we just don't see a need for moving forward, as well as just some cleanliness and tidiness. I know the coordinators have been working hard over the years to kind of chip away at it, but we think this is a year that we can really, with some investment, make those improvements. And the capital expenditures, or sorry, not capital, operating expenditures that we want to proceed with this year is building concrete block aggregate storage compounds at all 3 of our properties. And these are just pictures of examples of what we're thinking of doing. So putting one at the Lake Whitaker workshop, Galewood workshop, and back at the workshop back here, so that we can properly store our aggregates in a safe and proper usage area. We also want to look at doing a wooden fence compound around the Dalewood workshop. And I don't have any mapping here, I apologize for that, but at Dalewood, the workshop area is really exposed to the campground. Historically, it was the public dumping station. So it's very open. We tried to plant trees and naturalize a buffer, but we are finding that, again, we're seeing the public accessing these areas where we really want them staff only due to safety reasons. We have seen an increase in more larger waste being disposed at the dumpsters. That's scrap metal, barbecues, things like that, that we're needing to relocate, and we kind of store them for the summer, and then we take them to the scrappers and get a little extra revenue at the end of the year. So we're really seeing a need that we need to sever off the workshop area and make it a more safe staff-only area. As well as I think it's time, because of the storage of materials over the years, there's lots of unneeded, unused materials that we just want to purge and get rid of, so we need to rent some more industrial sized bins and just clean house this year while we have it. And the last item are our basketball nets for Lake Whitaker. The cost of that is for 2. For whatever reason, historically, Dalewood has always had more of a commercial grade basketball net like you would see in your public school playgrounds. And Dalewood, or Lake Whitaker, for some reason, has had more of a residential grade. And it appears we have some aspiring NBA players at Lake Whitaker that we're commonly replacing and doing that. So the basketball nets was originally listed on our capital purchases this year, so this was already considered by the board and approved. But we felt with the revenue that we have this year that we could operate those rather than pay for them over 30 years through the capital. So we're looking for endorsement of the board to proceed based on that, and we estimate a total budget of $30,000 to accomplish all of those needs.
So,
I'd move the staff proceed with expenditures as outlined in the report.
is there a second? Linda, discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Carried.
Okay, was it a quick question? Are you visualizing that those dumpsters will be on site all the time, Joe?
No, that's just waste disposal, so they'll be there for a week, we'll fill them and they'll take them out. But the cost is hard to narrow down, so it's $600 for one of that size, and depending on the weight, then we take it back, so we counted for that in that aspect.
Okay. Next is conservation area fees.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. So looking at our fee establishment again for this year, Last year, we kind of made the decision to wait until October so we could really have a look at all of the expenses for the year and do a cost comparison of what other campgrounds are charging. So with regard to our fees, we've done a comparison rate looking at other conservation area campgrounds in the area, considering that ourselves and one other conservation authority provide an all-inclusive price. And when I say that, it means it includes 2 vehicle passes, it includes an exterior, secondary fridge if they wish to have in their shed, golf cart, all of those things. So when we go through just looking at comparisons for our region, the average rate in 2018 for the combined rate, considering all those additional fees, was just over $2,500. Our current rate in the campgrounds is $2,400. We also took a quick look at private campgrounds that have meters, and their base rate was typically around just over $2,200 plus taxes and hydro. So when we take into those factors and consider it, we found that most of our transient rates were competitive, but there was room to increase with our seasonal camping. So we are proposing a $100 increase to our seasonal camping. That would bring us more in line with the 2018 regional rates. This would result then in the 30 amp seasonal rate being $2,500, and at Dalewood our base rate would be $2,100 plus a $400 deposit. The only other areas we saw for increases is our seasonal day use. So we were at $80, and looking at that comparison rate, so most of the other CAs are between $90 and $120. So we are recommending a $10 increase there to $90. As well, the ability to recoup some administration costs with our cancellation fees. So with the new reservation system we added last year, they charge us $10 per transaction, and that's all we were charging for a cancellation. So we weren't getting any administration costs to cover credit card transactions and things like that. So based on the review, we are recommending increasing our cancellation charge from $10 to $15. And as well, the only other recommendation for increased fees is with regard to unscheduled septic pump outs. And again, that's just so we're keeping in line with our neighboring CAs. The only other fee that I'd advise is the kilowatt hour fee. So we've gone through our summer hydro invoices, and basically what we do to calculate the average is we take the total expense divided by the total kilowatt hour so we can get an average. And this year it's actually gone down a penny from 2018. So we were charging 17 cents in 2018, and we'll actually be looking at charging 16 cents in 2019 based on the proposed fees. So we're looking for the board to approve those fees as presented.
Mover Linda, seconder. Ian, discussion. Yourself.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The meters that we use, just knowing that that there's a chance that they will fail, or one or two will fail throughout the year. How have we given any indication as to if there's a discrepancy, how we'll deal with those?
Yeah, so that's actually governed through Measurement Canada. So there is a process that if there was a complaint or process, there's a mitigation process that can go through Measurement Canada. We also realize that these meters are originally inspected and certified by Measurement Canada to be accurate. And I can't think of the time frames off the top of my head, but there is a time period they have to be calibrated and insured. So we're following Measurement Canada rules to ensure that they're accurate.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? That's carried. And next is we have the camping application.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So with this one, again, this is really building off some improvements and efficiencies in the campground. Historically, we've had a 15-page seasonal camping application that was printed, signed and executed by the camper as part of their application, and then one signed by the authority. It forms an agreement for the terms of the 5 months that they're camping on site. It certainly has been an onerous process with printing 180 to 200 applications, scanning once they're approved, and mailing out. So working with Cliff through the department, he's been really working on improving some online applications that we can get away from some of the paper processes. So as part of this, and I do have a hyperlink here, we can quickly show, we've tried to really streamline the process, reduce staff time and costs in producing the application, as well as making it more easier for the seasonal camper. So this is just what the starting page were. We have two different applications based on whether a new seasonal camper or a returning seasonal camper. The only difference is with a new seasonal camper, we have a bit of screening questions that our staff go through prior to calling them. We can get some of that information before they start, and then we give them the defined available sites that will be available once known, and as well as a map that will be produced to show them the sites that are available for new seasonal campers coming in. But if I quickly go through a returning seasonal camper, the ability to choose their campground, the site that they're currently on, provide us with all of the permit holder and registered campers, contact information, registering their vehicles, a little system with golf carts that if they have a golf cart, then we can get the information of the golf cart. If it's a new golf cart or modifications, we want them to upload a photograph. Primarily, golf carts have to be approved. We want to ensure they're not been modified for off-road use and things like that. As well then, to try and reduce some of the paperwork, we've added Section 5 and Section 6. That these were in your advanced packages. So this is all the rules, regulations, and the fees that deal with the park from the legal perspective. So this would be a hyperlink where they would open a PDF and they would acknowledge and agree that they've read and understand it. And then simply in the end, some declarations and acknowledgement of reading and understanding, and inputting their name as recognition of signature. So it certainly streamlines things. We've got input from legal that he's not concerned with the ability of not having a hand signature anymore, that we've got several checks and balances through the application form. As well, when they register at the campsite, they officially sign the permit. So legally, this would still be upheld in terms of the agreement portion that it becomes as moving forward. So certainly it's something that's going to be more efficient, easier for our users, as well as reduce a significant amount of staff time that's currently involved with processing seasonal applications.
Any questions on that? Mover and second to receive that. Bill? No? All in favor? That's carried. And next is the rental agreement insurance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is just an updated rental agreement for the Dan Patterson Conservation Area. Central Elgin has a special events permit, and we ran into that with the historical show this year down at Dan Patterson. The special events permit, well, we're not technically, I guess, required to have it because the events aren't occurring on municipal property. But what Central Elgin is introducing is a way to make sure that traffic's been considered, insurance been considered, to have all the health unit permits been required as well. So it was a good process to have gone through with the Kettle Valley Pioneers in terms of hosting the historical show down there. So what we've done is actually updated our application form to include a request, or to actually look at a trigger as to when we would ask groups registering for events down at Dan Patterson, when they would be required to get that special events permit from Dan Patterson. And the trigger that we're using is if the event is going to be selling food, either from the event organizer or from vendors, or charging an entrance fee in which the public would be coming on the grounds. And so that would trigger both them to get a special events permit from Central Elgin, so to go through that whole process and make sure everything is covered off, as well as trigger them to look at insurance, their own insurance, to cover that off. The other element of this report is you'll see that our insurance company, Marsh, has introduced a facility users program in which users that are renting conservation authority areas can actually apply for insurance for their group. Oftentimes when we ask for public organizations to make sure they have $2 million or some type of liability insurance to host these types of events, it's quite onerous for them to go out and get that insurance, or they're not sure how to go about it. Marsh has introduced this process to actually make it easier for those types of users to acquire insurance. So they can do it right through the authority, and then we notify Marsh that that's been purchased and they're covered off. One of the nice things is that it doesn't negate the insurance that we have on our property. It's just another layer of protection for all the parties involved, and none of the organizers of the event have insurance as well. So what we're asking for today is permission to introduce that agreement, and that KCCA offer the facility user group insurance program offered by Marsh Canada as outlined in the report.
One quick question, at this point in time, if people are gonna sell food, do they have to get clearance from the health unit?
They would as part of the special events, and the agreements that we have in place with those types of organizations, it's their responsibility to get any and all permits that are required to do anything that they're doing with their event. But we see the special events permit from Central Elgin, again, is just another layer of support to make sure that we're covering off all those bases.
Any other questions? Mover and seconder on the recommendation? Ian? Ralph? Anything further? All in favor? That's carried. And pending regulations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The report was in advanced packages, pretty typical applications since the last meeting, so nothing necessarily to draw your attention to, but I can answer any questions if the board has any.
Any questions on those? Seeing none, I need a mover and seconder to receive the report. Max and Linda, all in favor? That's carried. Now we're going to go to the source protection now. So
If we have time. Before we go past the consideration, so I would suggest on the source.
so we need to recess from this. And we need a mover and seconder to recess from this so we can go into the source protection. Bill, Marcel, all in favor? That's carried. So now we're under the Kettle Creek Source Protection Authority agenda. Now we're done that.
Actually, I can be very quick.
Because
I
it's
can,
good.
I'll talk fast.
Okay, so I'll read the first part of it. Board members, staff, guests, and members of the public are reminded that the KCSPA board meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the authority's website along with the official written minutes. As such, comments and opinions expressed may be published, and any comments expressed by individual board members, guests, and the general public are their own and do not represent the opinions or comments of the Source Protection Authority or the KCSPA Board of Directors. The recorded video of the KCSP meeting is not considered the official record of that meeting. The official record of the Source Protection Authority meeting shall consist solely of the minutes approved by the Source Protection Authority. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none. Minutes of the meeting, we have moved by Linda, seconded by Ian. Any questions on the minutes? Seeing none, all in favor? That's carried. Then we have the committee meeting.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I'm going to assume that motion was
It's
for
for
the,
all three of them,
all
right?
three?
Yeah,
Okay.
'cause they're all. Was there any questions on any of those three? So it's the authority meeting and the two committee meetings. Just so we're clear that then we voted on all three. Okay. And we have the correspondence.
Mr. Chair, the correspondence I'm going to highlight because it does bear relevant to the other business on the agenda in terms of the notice under section 48. So the memo came out from Heather Malcolmson, who's the director of the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks, in August. It was meant really to address some concerns that CAs had in terms of their Source Protection Authority role and recent amendments to the Safe Drinking Water Act and the Clean Water Act. And some of those amendments actually prescribe the Source Protection Authority to release a notice to any drinking water system owner that was applying for a permit or license to either enact a new system or to make updates to a new system. And there were some concerns identified by CAs that this was an additional responsibility under the Clean Water Act, and the authority was assuming duties under the Safe Drinking Water Act. So we're actually taking on more responsibilities by having to issue this extra notice. So in this letter from Heather Malcolmson, she assures authorities that the notices are only meant to provide assurances to the Source Protection Authority to involve them in that process so that we are aware that there are going to be changes or a new drinking water system within our area, that we can weigh in early in the process with any concerns that we might have with that new drinking water system or changes to the drinking water system, and that we can make the owner aware of timelines or requirements that they might have in terms of updating their system and relative to the source protection plan.
Elizabeth, just on that point?
Yeah.
So we have water authorities right now. Is there an expectation that they're included in discussion or that they receive minutes? What's the expectation of the relationship they want? I'm not sure what they're asking here. I mean, it's saying that we have some responsibility to look at it, but water, clean drinking water, requires some very specific expertise and is highly regulated. So what is the relationship they want between the conservation area and those authorities?
So basically what the ministry is saying is that the Source Protection Authority, as you're sitting right now, would be involved from the perspective that the system owner would notify us that they're either putting a new system in or they're changing the system. And then we would have the opportunity to know that that's happening and be able to notify the system owner that there is a source protection plan in place, and these are the types of things that they'll have to look at as they introduce that new system. And then really there's really no onus or obligation on the Source Protection Authority other than that, in terms of notifying them of what the policies are in terms of our source protection plan. The notification further to that in terms of reviewing any technical studies or anything like that wouldn't fall to this authority. That would still be handled by the lead Source Protection Authority in the broader region, if there's any requirements for that.
I just wonder, I mean, it requires a very specific expertise in order to even comment on such a thing.
And again, this isn't commenting on it, it's just a notification to us that it's occurring.
So
And
to
our
me, that
chance
just-
to,
I'm struggling with it. I mean, we sit on the water board. We know how highly regulated it is. For us to comment, even to comment, receive, and be aware, I mean, if something is overlooked, are we liable? Like I'm just struggling. I don't think we have that kind of expertise to be involved in this piece, and I'm not sure why they're asking it.
and again,
Sorry, I just don't want the onus to be back on our staff to make comment or to be seen as maybe something's overlooked or whatever. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but
and Mr. Chair, to legit
people
that,
are highly affected.
those were some of the concerns that were raised by the
Yeah.
source protection authorities or the conservation authorities, and that was what Heather's, Mrs. Malcolmson's letter was meant to rectify, is that these notices is not intended to imply the approval of any documents submitted to the Source Protection Authority. It's just notice that this is happening in your source protection area. And our ability to identify it to the lead CA, that they would become involved in any technical reviews.
Just a grand.
That's the grant. Who has the expertise.
Yeah.
It's just a notification.
It's just a notification, as long as it remains just a notification, because I don't want this to become a liability issue.
No,
I really don't.
and that was raised, and that's what the letter from the ministry is supposed to be providing you assurances on.
And I think they're making that money, but anyway. Anyways, okay, thank you, Elizabeth.
So that's in relation to the correspondence. In terms of the item number A, under new business, the actual authorization, this report actually speaks to the fact that we would be issuing those notices and request that the Secretary Treasurer, the General Manager of the Kettle Creek Conservation Authority be given the power to issue those notice of amendments, so as not to bog this down in requiring to come back to the Source Protection Authority in order to issue that notice. We don't want to stall the process by doing that. So that, the notice was actually reviewed by Conservation Ontario, was reviewed through a legal review of Conservation Ontario as well, and has already been adopted by the Grand River Source Protection Authority, and so it is being recommended that you consider that adoption as well today.
Okay, and do we look at E as well at the same time,
Those two were tied, so if you want to look for a motion to receive the correspondence, and then there's actually a motion on the notice.
Okay, on to the correspondence, and we'll move on to secondary.
So we received it, yes.
Just to receive it, yes. Ralph? Bill? All in favor? That's carried. And then the notice itself.
In terms of the notice, the recommendation is that the Kettle Creek Source Protection Authority authorize the GM and Secretary Treasurer of Kettle Creek Conservation Authority to issue notice of amendments to the Kettle Creek Source Protection Plan pursuant to Section 48(1.1)B of Ontario Regulation 28707 under the Clean Water Act 2006.
Okay, on that. You moving or any question?
A question.
Okay.
So who are we sending notice to?
The notice goes back to the the owner of the drinking water system.
Okay, now you will move it? Okay. Seconder? Bill? Further discussion? Linda?
I'm thinking it's just one more step that just makes this messy. I'm not gonna be voting in favor. I think the authority that we currently have in the primary water system, I think it's fine. I understand a notification of this back and forth correspondence. I think it's a total waste of time, but anyway, I don't think the expertise is there. I don't.
That's fine?
Yep.
We have a mover and seconders. Anything else? All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. And then B, section 36.
So, Mr. Chair, the second report on the agenda has to deal with the Section 36 Kettle Creek work plan. So the local source protection authority was tasked to develop a work plan for each source protection plan, and the Kettle Creek source protection plan must be submitted by November 30th of 2018. So when our plan was actually approved, then there was a timeline set out when we have to look at any amendments that we might want to consider to the source protection plan. And our timeline was that we have to have a work plan submitted to the province by November 30th of this year. So in terms of the work plan development, we struck a committee over the summer of Kettle Creek Source Protection Authority staff, led by the Grand River Source Protection Authority staff. We had members of the Elgin Area Primary Water Supply System on that committee, as well as Central Elgin. And they basically looked at 9 factors in terms of whether or not we needed to look at any amendments to our source protection plan, and associated a work plan for that comprehensive review. So the elements that that committee looked at was results of environmental monitoring programs, growth and infrastructure changes, council resolutions, policy effectiveness, implementation challenges, technical rule changes, impacts of prohibition policies on the agricultural community, and specific directions in some source protection plan approval letters. As you're well aware, in terms of our source protection plan, we have little concerns within our area, and certainly little concerns have come up in terms of implementation or any additional monitoring that's happened over these past 2 years. So the proposed work plan was attached. It was reviewed by the Source Protection Committee earlier this month, and the committee was satisfied that it had evaluated those 9 factors and provided recommendations to the work plan. And the committee is seeking your endorsement, basically to forward that on to the ministry.
I'll move it.
Mover. Seconder. Max. Any further questions? Seeing none, all in favor? That's carried. So as it says there, the next meeting will be as required. That's the end. I just need a mover and second to adjourn this. Ian and Linda, all in favor? That's carried. We'll now resume our full 40. And we'll be going into closed session. We need a mover and second to go into closed session.
Can we have a 3-minute break?
Yeah, we can. Bill, Ralph, all in favor? That's carried. Okay. As far as matters coming out of the close, the first one is we need a motion to pass the minutes. I guess we could do that as one, those 2 minutes, or do you want them
I
separate?
would prefer them
Prefer
separate.
separate. So the first one is the September 19th full authority closed session minutes. I have a mover and a seconder, Marcel and Ian. Questions? All in favor? That's carried. And on the second one, October 4th, 2018, Personnel and Finance Committee closed session minutes. Bill and Ralph, all in favor? That's carried. And business arising out of those minutes, we have a recommendation.
Mr. Chair, I'll read the recommendation that staff be directed to incorporate the 2019 salary proposal into the 2019 draft budget, that the Director of Operations job description be renamed Assistant Manager, Supervisor of Planning and Conservation Areas and ranked at grade 9. And finally, that Tim Chapman be appointed to permanent full-time employment in the position of lead hand.
Can I have a mover and seconder? We have Ian and Max. Questions? All in favor? That's carried. And that should bring us to the end, so we just need a motion to adjourn.
Sorry,
Or no,
Mr. Chair,
that's
you
one more.
wanted to.
All the other ones,
You
yes.
wanted,
Yes.
Yeah.
motion on D
Yeah.
for staff to proceed as directed.
Thanks, Steve.
And C, you
Okay.
want them separate or just?
Separate.
Separate, so on
So on C,
C, I shouldn't really,
you should
doing that.
specify.
Are we doing B now or C?
C.
C.
Could we have a motion to move forward as directed for that? C. Ralph, second by Max.
I'm a little bit confused. C?
It's correct.
C is the one that I wanted.
Okay. Thank you.
So it was Ralph and Max.
Mhm.
All in favor?
Okay. And on item D, it's,
For staff to
You're not
proceed
voting
as
on this
directed as well.
okay, under Shinzai, you mover and seconder on that? And Marcel and Bill, all in favor? That's carried. And do we have to hang on personnel? I guess no, we covered that.
Next meeting is November 21st.
All right, so November 21st, 10 o'clock is the next full authority meeting. Move to adjourn.
10 o'clock?
10 o'clock.
So,
So Marcel and Bill, all in favor? That's carried.